Well, Ronnie, it's interesting how much the U.S. and Israel are like criminalizing, or how much they do criminalize like footage being shared, which in itself is of course like a violation of press freedom, but they're like so scared of any of these images getting out. It's
Of course,
almost
yeah.
comical.
No, it's wild because you hear, oh, Iran has no freedom of the press. Iran is so repressive, and then you see like all these U.S. client states are literally like monarchy dictatorships. Um, and where even like people like Ahmed are getting arrested who has dual citizenship. Like that's supposed to give you some measure of protection. But though it should be said, I think Jamal Khashoggi actually might have had a U.S. green card. So I guess I don't know how much protection that is anymore. Meanwhile, you have the U.S. literally stripping people of their green cards, or trying to, and putting them in jail, and trying to deport them, like with Mahmoud Khalil for having opinions about Gaza they don't like. And then in Israel, you have a military censor where we weren't even allowed to really see how much damage was done to the Israelis. But no, totally insane. So just, I mean, I'm so sorry for Ahmed and what's going on with him. And I know it was a very difficult decision to even publicize it because you never know if
Mm.
that's going to actually make the situation worse with the way the Kuwaiti authorities act.
No, totally. I mean, and just to
Mhm.
remind people that there was a US journalist who also was imprisoned in Israeli jail, I think last year, Jeremy Lafredo, for filming the impact of Iranian missiles in Israel in the June 2025 retaliation to Israeli and US attacks. So, of course, important to follow that case. But Rania, wow, a lot has happened in the past 24 hours, and I've been kind of biting my tongue so we could have time for you to break down to the audience exactly what is happening. I mean, every day, every hour, it feels like there's new updates about ceasefire in Lebanon. We've seen images of people returning to the south. Give us a sense of what has gone down. What does it mean for Lebanon? What does it mean for Iran? All of that.
Well, let me kind of like set the stage for how this happened before I get to what the ceasefire means, because anyone who's been watching our show knows that I've been shouting from Lebanon since this war started. I mean, I've always been shouting since they've been watching the show, but specifically since March 2nd, when Lebanon entered the regional war between the U.S. and the Israelis on one side, launching this war of aggression against Iran, and then entering the war on the Iranian side with Hezbollah firing rockets at Israel after over 15,000 ceasefire violations from a 2024 ceasefire that was in place that Israel never abided by. And in that time, Hezbollah was like rebuilding after they faced a kind of defeat. And then they came out with this war against Iran on Iran's side, with the idea in mind that they could change the status quo, which was Israel bombing Lebanon every day in the south and killing over 370 people, without anything being done about it. Hezbollah honored the ceasefire, didn't fire a single bullet in those 15 months, and then said they have had enough, right? So then you have Israel respond to this escalation from Hezbollah with a massive war across the country that had been ongoing. And then we get to a point as the Iran war is going on, right? And then we get to a point where the Iranians and Americans, after Trump threatened civilizational death against Iran, agreeing to a pause in the fighting, a 2-week ceasefire to start negotiations for something potentially longer term. And that agreement came with a stipulation that Israel ceasefire on Lebanon, that Lebanon be included in this US Iranian ceasefire. Within hours, Netanyahu said absolutely not and unleashed on Lebanon. And that was last Wednesday, April 8th, when you saw Israel gloating that they dropped 160 bombs in the course of 10 minutes, most of them specifically on Beirut. Basically, a massive terrorist operation that they called Operation Eternal Darkness, because they want you to know they are the supervillain in this movie, in case you thought any different. And they killed 400 people in the course of 10 minutes, and it horrified the world. And then the war continued to escalate after that, and every single day of that escalation, after that horrific terrorist attack centered on Beirut, you saw attempts by the Iranians to get them to stop, placing this condition on ongoing negotiations with the US, saying the war on Lebanon needs to stop. And part of that is because they're allied with Hezbollah. That's a partner of theirs. And they want to protect Lebanon because of that allyship. It's an ideological allyship, and it's also a materially beneficial allyship. And it was also a test for the U.S. Iran wanted to see if the U.S. is capable or willing to restrain the Israelis, because in any future settlement with the Americans, it also has to be a settlement that guarantees Israel cannot go to war against Iran again. Iran wants a war, this war, to end all the wars. No more wars against Iran. They don't want to be, in a situation where the Americans and the Israelis are, quote unquote, mowing the lawn the way they've always done with Gaza and Lebanon, where every few years they go in and carry out more so Gaza, but increasingly Lebanon, where every few years they go and carry out a new war to try to weaken their opponents further. It's literally, that's how they talk about us, mowing the lawn, right? So eventually what we see is that Trump finally did apply pressure on the Israelis. The Israelis were prepared to continue because the Israelis, it's a killing machine. That's what Israel is. It's a killing machine that will continue to kill no matter how much it even hurts them, by the way. They don't care anymore. They absolutely do not care anymore. These wars of attrition that they get stuck in and bogged down in and never win in. They still haven't won in Gaza. I mean, no one's won in Gaza, but they certainly haven't either. Because they still are being fought in Gaza, right? And Lebanon is different than Gaza. It's not, under the same kind of blockade. It's a lot bigger. And that war could go on for very, very long, and maybe still will, by the way, if Israel wanted to keep going. So Iran forced the hand of Trump. And it turns out now, if you look at the statements coming out today, so last night, finally, a ceasefire was imposed by Donald Trump. He forced Netanyahu to agree to a ceasefire. Netanyahu did not want to. That was Donald Trump forcing it. He was forcing it for one reason only: the Iranians demanded it. And I'll talk about how one-sided the ceasefire is in just a moment, but I'm just emphasizing that because the debate inside Lebanon, and in some cases outside Lebanon, is who's responsible for the ceasefire. It's not the Iranians. People who are opposed to any resistance in the region and hate Iran, hate Hezbollah, hate really their entire idea of how to deal with the Israelis is to capitulate and submit to them and to have Lebanese government become like the Palestinian Authority. That's literally what they want. So we have a Lebanese Zionism problem in Lebanon, and we also have a surrender problem in Lebanon. And so those two together led to this week, the Lebanese government, after the Iranians announced Lebanon should be a part of the ceasefire last week, the Lebanese government came out a day after Israel killed 400 people in 10 minutes across Beirut and across Lebanon. A day later, the Lebanese prime minister announced direct negotiations with the Israelis. Why would you do that? Under fire. Under fire. That is like rule number one. You use that as leverage. At the very least, you use negotiations as leverage. We will sit down with you after you stop killing us, after you hold your fire. Instead, they participated with the Americans and essentially the Lebanese government essentially joined the war with Israel against Hezbollah. And this week, the Lebanese ambassador to DC and the Israeli ambassador to DC, who is, by the way, a far-right Israeli settler who was born in the U.S. and has been a member of two Jewish terrorist organizations, the JDL and the Koch Party. That's who the Lebanese ambassador met with, overseen by Marco Rubio in DC. The Israelis refused to agree to a ceasefire. And the whole meeting was just about prioritizing disarming Hezbollah in the middle of a massive invasion and attempted occupation by the Israelis. So people in Lebanon who are on the side of surrender or on the side of Zionism, because those are slightly different things, but they converge, those people are attributing the ceasefire not to Iran forcing Trump to force Israel, which is actually what happened, but they're attributing it to these surrender negotiations. They're saying that's why they gave us a ceasefire, which is absurd. The Lebanese government has zero leverage, zero power, and by doing this, by also continuing now to say that they will have direct negotiations with the Israelis for supposed peace, they are polarizing and splitting the country even further. We'll come back to that because that's an ongoing developing story that will unfortunately continue with the coming weeks. About the ceasefire. So the ceasefire that Trump pressured the Israelis to abide by. is completely one-sided. It is a version of what was in place in 2024, which was also a one-sided ceasefire, but it's actually even worse because the 2024 ceasefire at least conditioned that the Israelis would eventually withdraw from Southern Lebanon. This ceasefire says nothing about withdrawal. I mean, it is a 10-day ceasefire, so that could change if this war doesn't have a round two. But as of now, there's nothing about Israeli withdrawal. So the Israelis haven't withdrawn. And it also says that Israel shall preserve the right to take all necessary measures in self-defense at any time against planned, imminent, or ongoing attacks. And this, it says this shall not be impeded by the cessation of hostilities. So that means Israel can, if they decide to, if they decide there's a threat to them, they don't have to explain what that means to us. They can say anything a threat. They can say there was a person thinking bad things about that and us, and that's threatening. And to defend ourselves, we have to kill them. And according to this ceasefire list, that would be allowed. There is no such stipulation for the Lebanese side. The Lebanese don't have any right to self-defense whatsoever. That's completely one-sided. It basically allows Israel to still have what's called freedom of action, which is what they do everywhere, bomb whenever the hell they want. So I think those are the two. And then there's and then it says, that the Lebanese and Israelis share an objective basically against Hezbollah to prevent them and any other non-state group in the territory of Lebanon from carrying out any attacks. So it makes the Lebanese government a party on the Israeli side. That's what the ceasefire says, which is really problematic. So this is, again, very lopsided. It's got people very concerned. They're not sure if they can actually go home. A lot of people did return to the south today, but not everybody did because they want to wait and see what happens because Israel has already violated the ceasefire a couple times. Once by firing at an ambulance in South Lebanon. And another time, according to civil defense, they actually killed somebody in a drone strike in the south, which is a total violation of the ceasefire already. And that was, I believe, after Donald Trump had tweeted out that he is prohibiting Israel from bombing Lebanon. So this continues to be a test, right, to see if the Americans, if we're talking about Iran, if the Americans can actually restrain their demon child. So let's see if they can do it. They should be able to, but Netanyahu is really testing it. We also saw the Iranians, and this is how you know it's completely connected to Iranian pressure. Abbas Araghchi, the foreign minister, tweeted out not too long ago that the Strait of Hormuz, with IRGC permission, would open the strait and allow vessels through, except for U.S. Navy vessels. No U.S. Navy vessels allowed, which makes sense. But other vessels, including U.S. ships, would be allowed through as long as the Lebanon ceasefire is in place. So it seems to be that they actually kept the Strait of Hormuz closed because of the fact that Lebanon was, the ceasefire in Lebanon was violated, and they were pressuring the Trump administration. If they want to continue negotiations and open that strait, you have to cease fire on Lebanon. So it's increasingly clear that this was Iranian pressure. I don't see how anybody else can see it differently unless they're either A, delusional, or B, they have some sort of agenda that is extremely anti-Iran, obviously, or anti-Hezbollah, or both. So the ceasefire is incredibly fragile. So far, today is day one. There's already been some Israeli violations. We'll see if Trump can get them under control. I did speak to the next guest we're going to have on, which we'll play in just a moment. But I do want to say something about surrender. Because across this region, we have governments that have surrendered to the Israelis, that have normalized with the Israelis. It doesn't matter. They still come for you. It's like your options are either you become a slave to U.S. empire, and they'll use you as cannon fodder, by the way, if you do that, as we saw with the Gulf states and the Jordanians, use them as cannon fodder, as human shields for their bases to protect themselves from Iranian missiles when they start a war of aggression, a reckless one, without considering the consequences for their so-called friends. Or you resist. And no matter what you choose, you're screwed, especially if you border Israel. I mean, a lot of these Gulf states are not bordering Israel. The Israelis are not trying to take their territory. In the case of Lebanon, Palestine, and Syria, and I would say even Jordan, But, Jordan's normalized and it's a monarchy where nobody has any rights. It's a total dictatorship. It's a CIA base for America. But when it comes to the Syrians and the Lebanese and the Palestinians, the Israelis are not going to stop. They're never going to stop. They have an ideology. They have a Zionist, settler, colonial, greater Israel ideology. And you either join the colonizers by capitulating to them and killing your own people and killing yourself. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot. You become the Palestinian Authority. You give up your weapons. You join Israel's security apparatus to police your citizens and genocide them. Or you fight the Israelis, which, both of those things introduce death, but one of them at least has dignity to it. I think there's two really good examples here to see. Because Syria is a perfect example of a country that is not resisting anything. The Israelis bombed all of their military infrastructure. Ahmed al-Shara, Syria's former al-Qaeda leader, has not fired a single bullet at the Israelis, and he has been begging the Israelis to be his friend. He wants normalization so badly. Even if it's unofficial, he wants peace with Israel, whatever the hell that means. In response, Israel has continued to occupy Syrian land, occupy even more Syrian land, and literally sometimes invade Syria and kidnaps and kills people. Despite all of that. And you have Israel's far-right ministers calling for assassinating Ahmed al-Shara. So that's what surrender and capitulation gets you. That's what it gets you. So I just don't understand these Lebanese who can see that, who can see the Palestinian Authority, who have watched 2.5 years of Gaza and sit there and go, you know what? We should try to be friends with them. Forget Gaza. Watch what they've done to Lebanon. Look what they did to Beirut last week. You don't care about the South? Look what they did to Beirut last week. The Israelis, during this war, murdered a Lebanese forces official. And they shrugged their shoulders. They barely even apologized for it. Lebanese Forces is a far-right Christian political party in Lebanon that has historically and basically currently is allied with Israel. They killed one of their own. They do not care. You are the same to them as a Lebanese Shia from the south or a Palestinian from Gaza. They'll just kill you a little differently and ruin your life a little differently. I don't understand this Lebanese mentality at all. If they were smart, what they would be doing is talking about a national defense strategy. And if you really, really cared about stability in the country, Hezbollah are Lebanese people. You would find a way to absorb them into your security apparatus. That's what you would do in any sane world, because you have an aggressor in the south that is never going to stop. They're never going to stop doing that. They're never going to stop trying to steal your country and kill you. They haven't done it since they were created. They're not going to stop now with Netanyahu and Bezalel Smotrich and Ben Gvir in charge of the country, who are literally bringing the Torah on their backs to tell you this land belongs to us because God said so. Get out of our way. That's all I have to say for now.
No, it's well noted, and I think we're very lucky to have you to give us this expert analysis, which of course has historical examples and current reality. You're speaking to experts all the time, getting this information. So it's really invaluable there. And one thing I'll add, Zoe, before we move on, I wanted to say is the ceasefire I mentioned, it's so lopsided. And you've now got the Trump administration talking about bringing together the Israeli and Lebanese leadership for direct negotiations, which seems like it's going to happen. Unfortunately, the Lebanese government put themselves in that position. Some of them wanted to. And now they're stuck. And they're going to have to keep doing these negotiations or they're going to get punished. And the country's going to get punished. Lebanon's only hope is if Iran continues to insist in their negotiations for a better arrangement in whatever regional settlement we end up in. And so all these people sitting there being like, oh, Lebanon's sovereignty, oh, Iran shouldn't be negotiating for us. It's so ridiculous. Why wouldn't you want to be a part of a broader regional settlement that benefits your country? Not only that, all of these people that whine and cry about Iranian influence in Lebanon. Yeah, Iran does have influence in Lebanon. So does Saudi Arabia and so do the Americans. You don't seem to have any problem with that. You don't seem to have any problem with the fact that the Americans literally will tell the Lebanese government, you're not allowed to do business with China. Isn't that an issue of sovereignty?
The Americans literally get to approve or veto who gets picked for certain positions in whatever cabinet's in charge of Lebanon. And by the way, the same goes for the Saudis. Nobody has an issue with being influenced by the Americans and the Saudis, because just be honest. You want to be in their orbit. Fine. I would appreciate the honesty more than this BS argument about, Iranian influence and sovereignty. Lebanon's a tiny country in a region full of bigger powers. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying it's okay, but in the real world, that means that, groups inside of Lebanon are going to try to align themselves with bigger powers who can help them. And those who are constantly complaining about Iran, you literally have an American hand up your ass. Be honest about that. Okay, now I'm really done.